And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. This cryptic verse from Genesis 5:24 has haunted theologians for millennia, but the ancient Ethiopian text known as the Book of Enoch offers a far more detailed and perhaps terrifying explanation. And behold, I saw the clouds, and they were calling me in a vision, and the fogs were calling me, and the course of the stars and the lightnings were rushing me and hastening me, and the winds in the vision caused me to fly and lifted me upward and bore me into heaven. If these words are not mere allegory, but a literal account of a physical abduction, we are forced to ask three uncomfortable questions. Was the patriarch Enoch the first human to undergo an extraterrestrial abduction? Did he witness the inner workings of a celestial spacecraft rather than a metaphysical heaven? And could the warning he returned to deliver be a countdown to a cycle of destruction that is about to repeat itself? The texts exist, etched in the memory of antiquity, waiting for us to decipher the technical manuals hidden within the prayers. However, before we ascend into these forbidden skies, we must offer a necessary caution, for what follows are highly controversial propositions that challenge the very foundations of history and religion. As Aristotle so wisely posited, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Our journey begins not in the pews of a church, but in the dusty archives of the ancient Near East, where the name Enoch echoes the Sumerian king Enmeduranki, the seventh king on the antediluvian list who, like Enoch, was summoned by the gods to the city of Sippar to learn the secrets of heaven and earth. Conventional theology presents Enoch as a man of such supreme piety that God spared him the indignity of death, whisking him away to a spiritual paradise. Yet this interpretation glosses over the specific, almost industrial descriptions found in the apocryphal texts, descriptions that sound less like a beatific vision and more like a terrifying encounter with advanced technology. There is a specific detail in the Slavic Book of Enoch regarding the clothes Enoch was forced to wear, a detail that seems insignificant now, describing a strange ointment and garments of glory. But as we will reveal later, this closely matches the decontamination protocols used by modern astronauts, a connection that changes everything we think we know about his ascent. While traditional scholars view the Book of Enoch as a piece of apocalyptic literature from the Second Temple period, meant to offer hope to a persecuted people, the text itself claims to be much older, a first-hand account of a man taken physically from the surface of the earth. We must consider the possibility proposed by the late Zecharia Sitchin and other proponents of the ancient astronaut theory, that the Hebrew Elohim and the Sumerian Anunnaki are one and the same, flesh and blood beings who colonized Earth in the distant past. In this context, Enoch's walking with God becomes a physical accompaniment, a recruitment by the commander of the mission, possibly the deity known in Sumer as Utu or Shamash, the god of the spaceport. Just as Enki was said to have shared forbidden knowledge with humanity in the Sumerian epics, we here at Astroway strive to uncover the narratives that history has obscured. If this mission to challenge official dogmas resonates with your own search for truth, consider subscribing to join us as we decode the past. The texts describe Enoch being taken to a place where crystal stones formed the walls and the ceiling, and where tongues of fire surrounded him, a description that arguably resembles the interior of a fusion-powered craft or a high-tech space station, rather than a cloudy paradise. The watchers described in the text, the Erin, are often interpreted as angels, but the etymology suggests those who watch or those who remain awake, fitting the profile of a crew on an orbital station monitoring the planet below. This interpretation divides researchers sharply, with some seeing spiritual beings of pure light and others seeing biological entities using technology that primitive man could only describe as magic. We invite you to pause and consider. Do you believe the Watchers were fallen angels in a spiritual sense, or extraterrestrial biological entities misidentified by ancient scribes? Share your perspective in the comments below, for the implications of either choice are staggering. Moving to the physical evidence, we find that the Book of Enoch contains precise astronomical data describing the movements of the sun and moon with an accuracy that should have been impossible for a pre-Diluvian nomad. He describes portals in heaven through which the stars pass, a concept that aligns eerily with orbital mechanics and the seasonal windows for launch and re-entry. He mentions a cosmic clock, a complex mechanism of gears and wheels. This brings us back to that detail we mentioned earlier about the clothes he wore. The text says the Lord commanded the archangel Michael to go and take Enoch from out of his earthly garments and anoint him with my sweet ointment and put him into the garments of my glory. This ointment is described as being greater than the great light, and once applied, Enoch's body transformed. Could this be a description of a radiation shielding process or a biosterilization procedure required for a human to enter a sterile extraterrestrial environment? If Enoch was physically brought aboard a spacecraft, the garments of glory were likely a pressure suit, necessary for survival in the vacuum of space or the different atmosphere of the mothership. This technological interpretation gains weight when we look at the specific geography mentioned in the texts, particularly Mount Hermon, the site where the 200 watchers descended. This location is not random, it is a strategic vantage point in the Levant, and remarkably, near the colossal stone platform of Baalbek in Lebanon, where limestone blocks weighing over 800 tons, the trilithon, sit atop a podium that defies Roman engineering capabilities. If the watchers used Baalbek as a landing pad and Mount Hermon as a command center, Enoch's abduction was a local transport from the surface to the orbital station. We often find these ascent myths in other cultures, such as the story of Adapa in Mesopotamia, who was taken to Anu's gate in heaven, or the Mayan king Pakal, whose sarcophagus lid famously depicts a man manipulating controls in a suspended capsule, with a breathing apparatus aimed at his nose. But there is a darker side to this contact. Enoch was not just a tourist, he was a witness for the prosecution. The text describes the sins of the Watchers, teaching humanity metallurgy, cosmetics, sorcery, and crucially, genetic mixing. The Nephilim, the offspring of these Watchers and human women, were genetic hybrids that threatened the stability of the planetary experiment. The Book of Giants, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, elaborates on this, giving names to these hybrid offspring like Gilgamesh and Hobabish. Is it possible that the corruption of all flesh described in Genesis was a reference to unauthorized genetic engineering that contaminated the human genome? Sitchin argued that the flood was a deliberate attempt by the Enlilite faction of the Anunnaki to wipe out these genetic aberrations and reset the experiment, a terrifying thought that suggests humanity is merely a crop to be managed. Yet standard archaeology dismisses the Nephilim as symbolic representations of kingly hubris, viewing the giants as metaphors for powerful men rather than biological anomalies. But this fails to explain the universal obsession with demigods across the globe. Returning to the narrative loop we opened regarding the books Enoch wrote, the text claims he returned to Earth for a brief period to give his son Methuselah 366 books containing all the knowledge of the universe. The question that has plagued treasure hunters for centuries is, where are these books now? Legends say they were buried in the vaults of the earth before the flood, perhaps under the Great Sphinx of Giza, or in the rumored archives beneath the Vatican. While we cannot prove their location today, the content of the surviving Book of Enoch describes the shape of the earth as a sphere viewed from above, mentioning the ends of the earth where the heaven rests, and distinct climatic zones that he could only have seen from a suborbital trajectory. Einstein's theory of relativity might also play a role here. In the texts, Enoch disappears for what seems like a short time to the gods, but returns to find generations have passed, or conversely, lives an impossibly long lifespan of 365 years before being taken permanently. This time dilation is a hallmark of high-speed space travel. No one has satisfactorily explained how a text written thousands of years ago could contain accurate descriptions of orbital mechanics and a spherical Earth without external information. Can you think of an alternative explanation for this specific scientific data in an ancient religious text? Creative theories are welcome in the comments. We must also address the technological descriptions of the environment Enoch visited, specifically the house of God. He describes it as built of crystals and hailstones, surrounded by tongues of fire, and yet hot as fire and cold as ice. This paradox of temperature is exactly what one experiences in space: extreme heat in direct sunlight and absolute zero in shadow, a physical reality of the vacuum that a desert dweller could not invent. The crystal walls could be the viewports or the metallic hull of a craft reflecting starlight. Furthermore, the ophonym, the wheels within wheels covered in eyes, are often depicted in religious art as surreal angels, but through the lens of technology, they look strikingly like rotating space stations or the gyroscopic stabilizers of a propulsion system, with eyes being portholes or sensors. When we compare this to the Vimanas of the Vedic texts, which are described as flying palaces powered by Mercury vortices, or the Shem rockets of Sumer, the pattern becomes undeniable. We have identified connections between the Hebrew, Sumerian, and Vedic flight traditions, but do you know of other cultures with similar myths of abducted scribes? Share them in the comments, as these cross-cultural links are vital to the investigation. As we approach the climax of Enoch's story, we must close the loop on the warning he delivered. The 366 books were not just encyclopedias, they were a survival guide. Enoch warned Methuselah that a cataclysm was coming to wash away the genetic pollution of the Nephilim. This wasn't divine wrath in the mystical sense, but a calculated geoengineering decision by the Anunnaki Council. The Rainbow Covenant that followed the flood wasn't just a promise, but a treaty between the extraterrestrial factions and the remnants of humanity. And remember that detail about the specific tablet mentioned earlier, the one that changes everything. In the Sumerian equivalent, the tablet Enmeduranki receives is the Tablet of the Gods, which grants the bearer the legal right to rule. If Enoch, metamorphosed into the archangel Metatron in later Jewish mysticism, was given this authority, it implies that a human was promoted to the rank of the gods, effectively becoming the vice-regent of the fleet. This transformation into Metatron is described as his flesh turning to flame and his eyes to torches, a metaphor perhaps for a transhumanist upload of consciousness into a non-biological substrate, or an energetic evolution facilitated by advanced technology. While academics maintain that Enoch is a solar hero myth, representing the 365 days of the year, the technological specificity of his abduction narrative argues for a memory of a physical event. We will explore the wars of the Nephilim and the post-flood return of the gods in future documentaries, so make sure you are subscribed to follow these revelations as we continue this journey. Ultimately, the story of Enoch leaves us with a profound duality. He is either the ultimate fictional archetype of the sage, created to bridge the gap between man and the divine, or he was the first human ambassador to an extraterrestrial civilization, chosen to document the end of one world and the beginning of another. If the Anunnaki really existed and Enoch was their scribe, it means our religious history is actually a record of colonial governance by a superior species. Would accepting this change your fundamental view of the world and your place in it? Reflect on this and share your thoughts in the comments as we gaze up at the same stars that once rushed and hastened Enoch into the sky. We remain like him, small figures standing on the edge of a vast, mysterious cosmos, waiting for the watchers to return. After the flood had swept over and kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. This simple declaration from the Sumerian king list marks the dawn of a new era, a world supposedly washed clean. But if the Great Flood was an act of celestial judgment designed to reset a flawed experiment, what happened next? What if the deluge was not an end, but merely a tactical reset in a war that never ended? We are forced to ask, did the survivors simply rebuild, or were they pawns in a new cosmic game for control of the planet? Was the rise of Babylon and Egypt a natural evolution, or the carefully orchestrated establishment of rival power bases by competing extraterrestrial factions? And could the most iconic monuments of the ancient world, the Tower of Babel and the Great Pyramids of Giza, be the silent, monolithic relics of this post-apocalyptic conflict? There is a curious detail in the book of Genesis concerning the Tower of Babel, not just the confusion of tongues but the materials used, brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. This architectural footnote seems mundane, but as we will reveal, it may be a coded admission of using a forbidden technology, a secret handed down by the wrong god. Our story resumes on a wet, barren earth, where academia tells us traumatized survivors slowly pieced civilization back together, their myths of a great flood serving as a cultural warning against hubris. The Tower of Babel is presented as a cautionary tale against human arrogance, and the magnificent pyramids of Egypt are understood as the ultimate expression of royal power, grandiose tombs for god-king pharaohs. Yet, this narrative crumbles under the weight of its own inconsistencies. How did organized kingship simply descend from heaven in Kish? How did Sumerian civilization emerge, seemingly overnight, with a fully formed system of law, astronomy, and agriculture? According to ancient astronaut theorists, the answer is simple. The Anunnaki returned. The flood had wiped out the genetic contamination of the Nephilim, but the game for earthly control was far from over. Zecharia Sitchin proposed that the planet was divided into 3 new territories. The Sinai Peninsula, with its natural geography ideal for a spaceport, was declared neutral territory. The lands to the east, Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, remained under the control of the Enlilite faction, the stern disciplinarians of the Old Order. But the lands to the west, specifically Egypt and Africa, were granted to the rival faction, the party of Enki, the rebellious scientist who had saved humanity from the flood. And it is here in the lands of Enki that the so-called Pyramid Wars would begin. Just as the Anunnaki gods sought to divide and control the post-flood world, this channel seeks to explore the divided narratives that shape our understanding of the past. If you believe in looking beyond the official story, consider subscribing to join this investigation. The Giza Plateau stands as the primary battlefield in this theoretical war. The Great Pyramid, composed of 3 million stone blocks weighing up to 80 tons each, is a monument to impossibility. Mainstream Egyptology insists it was built over 20 years with copper chisels and brute force, a theory that strains credulity. Its internal shafts align with celestial bodies like Orion and Sirius, with a precision that defies explanation for its time, and inside the king's chamber sits a stark granite coffer, empty. It was supposedly looted in antiquity, but there is no evidence of a forced entry, and the coffer itself is larger than the passageway leading to it, meaning it was placed there during construction. What if it was never meant to hold a body? We will later explore a radical theory of what it was really designed to contain, a purpose that transforms the pyramid from a tomb into a machine. This conflict between interpretations is fierce. Academics are certain the pyramids are tombs, pointing to the surrounding mortuary complexes as proof. Theorists see powerful machines, citing the structure's incredible precision and acoustic properties. Which argument holds more weight for you? Are the pyramids tombs, power plants, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This idea of a technological purpose gains traction when we connect it to the rivalries described in Sumerian texts. Remember the strange detail about brick and bitumen used at Babel? According to Sitchin, this was not a primitive choice, but a deliberate one. The project, led by Enki's ambitious son Marduk in Babylon, was an attempt to build a rival launch tower, a new gateway to the gods, using easily manufactured materials to directly challenge Enlil's control over the official spaceport. The subsequent confusion of tongues was not a divine punishment, but an act of technological sabotage by the Enlilite faction to halt the construction of a rival aerospace facility. This theme of divine weapons and technological warfare is not isolated. The biblical destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah with fire and brimstone is often seen as a moral fable. However, archaeologists have found layers of vitrified sand and melted rock in the region of the Dead Sea, evidence of an extreme heat event around 4,000 years ago. Geologists offer explanations involving ignited natural gas deposits or cosmic airbursts, but ancient astronaut theorists point to a more sinister cause: the use of tactical nuclear or plasma weapons by the Anunnaki to obliterate cities deemed rebellious. Could a forgotten weapon exist that could cause such complete destruction without leaving the distinct isotopic signatures we would look for today? We invite you to speculate with us in the comments. These stories of divine warfare are global. In the Vedic scriptures of India, the god Indra wields the Vajra, a weapon that shoots lightning bolts during his war with the Asuras. The epic Mahabharata describes the Brahmastra, a weapon brighter than 1,000 suns, that could boil the seas and cause the hair and nails of soldiers to fall out, a chillingly accurate description of the effects of nuclear fallout. When we view these texts not as myths but as military histories, the gods become generals, and their magical weapons become advanced technology. Now, let's return to that empty coffer in the king's chamber. Engineer and researcher Christopher Dunn, in his book, The Giza Power Plant, proposed a stunning hypothesis. The Great Pyramid was not a tomb, but a machine. He argues its precise construction and internal layout were designed to harness the natural vibrations of the Earth and convert them into microwave energy. In his model, the Queen's Chamber was used to generate hydrogen gas, which filled the Grand Gallery and King's Chamber, creating a powerful acoustic resonance chamber. The granite coffer, he suggests, was the heart of the system, a resonator box that collected and amplified the energy, which was then beamed wirelessly from the pyramid's peak. The pyramid, in this view, was a power source for the entire civilization, or perhaps a weapon. Of course, this is where the academic world draws a hard line. Critics of the power plant theory point to the lack of any surviving machinery, wiring, or physical evidence of such a system. They argue that the precision of the pyramid, while astonishing, is not impossible with enough time, manpower, and simple but effective tools. Geologists provide natural explanations for vitrified forts and melted rock, and linguists can trace the evolution of languages without invoking a supernatural event at Babel. The critical perspective insists that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and a granite box and some ancient stories do not constitute proof of extraterrestrial wars. We see stories of gods fighting with powerful weapons from Mesopotamia to India to the Americas. Do you know of a local myth from your culture that describes gods fighting in the sky or using weapons of immense power? Share these stories in the comments so we can all help piece together this potential global history. But if the pyramids were indeed machines and the Tower of Babel a launchpad, we must ask the most fundamental question of all. Why were they here? What resource was so precious that it warranted a descent from the stars, a colonization of a hostile planet, and a war between the gods? The Sumerian texts provide a blunt economic answer that strips away the mysticism of religion and replaces it with the cold logic of industry. Gold. Not for jewelry, nor for commerce, but for survival. According to the translations of Zechariah Sitchin, the home planet of the Anunnaki, Nibiru faced a catastrophic atmospheric collapse. Their scientists concluded that suspending microscopic particles of gold in their upper atmosphere could shield the planet from cosmic radiation and retain heat. Thus, Earth was not a tourist destination, it was a mine. This reframes the entire biblical narrative of creation. In the Atrahasis epic Ser, a text that predates Genesis by centuries, we read of the Igigi, the lower caste astronauts who were forced to toil in the mines of the Abzu, located in Southeast Africa. For 40 shahs, periods of 3,600 years, they suffered the back-breaking labor of excavation until finally they mutinied. They set fire to their tools, they put fire to their spaceships. This was the first labor strike in recorded history, and it forced the commander Enlil to seek a solution. His brother, the chief scientist Enki, proposed a radical idea. Let us create a Lulu, a primitive worker, to carry the burden of the gods. And here lies the most disturbing possibility of our existence. Humanity was not created in the image of a benevolent creator to be loved, but engineered as a biological machine to be used. There is a specific biological anomaly hidden inside your own cells that science has only recently begun to decode, a smoking gun that may prove this genetic manipulation. We will reveal this exact evidence shortly, but first, we must examine the creation laboratory itself. The Sumerian texts describe the House of Shimti, a sterile facility where Enki and his half-sister Ninmah, the chief medical officer, conducted their experiments. The word Adam in Hebrew is derived from Adamah, meaning earth, but the Sumerian root tit, often translated as clay, also has a double meaning, that which has life. Were the gods molding mud statues, or were they manipulating living biomass? The description of the process sounds hauntingly like in vitro fertilization and cloning. The text details how the essence of a young Anunnaki was mixed with the egg of a female hominid, likely Homo erectus, to create a hybrid. Enki says, "The creature whose name you uttered, it exists. Bind upon it the image of the gods." Compare this to Genesis 1:26, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." The plurality of us and our has puzzled theologians for centuries, often explained away as the royal we. But in the context of the Sumerian tablets, it is a literal reference to the scientific team of Enki, Ninmah, and the council. This hybrid nature explains the duality of the human condition. We are torn between our animalistic instincts, the heritage of our earthly mother, and our obsession with the stars, the divine spark of our extraterrestrial fathers. This is not just mythology. It is a hypothesis that addresses the missing link that Darwinian evolution has failed to fully bridge. Evolution takes millions of years to effect minor changes, yet the human brain tripled in size in a blink of geological time, roughly 200,000 years ago. This explosive growth in cognitive ability, the sudden emergence of language, art, and complex tool use, defies the slow, gradual curve of natural selection. Sir Francis Crick, the Nobel Prize winner who co-discovered the structure of DNA, famously stated that the complexity of the DNA molecule was too great to have evolved by chance. He proposed directed panspermia, the theory that life was deliberately seeded on Earth by an advanced civilization. If one of the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century was open to this possibility, why is it considered taboo? Does the idea that you might be a genetic experiment make you feel less significant, or does it give you a sense of cosmic purpose? We want to hear your perspective on this divine heritage in the comments below. This brings us back to the promise we made about the genetic smoking gun. Deep within the human genome lies human chromosome 2. In all other great apes, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, there are 24 pairs of chromosomes. Humans have only 23. This difference should make us genetically incompatible. However, under a microscope, chromosome 2 appears to be two ancestral ape chromosomes fused together, end to end. At the fusion point, there are remnants of telomeres, the protective caps usually found at the ends of chromosomes, buried in the middle. This fusion is unique to humans. While mainstream science attributes this to a random evolutionary event, ancient astronaut theorists suggest this was the genetic splice performed in the house of Shimti, the deliberate fusing of chromosomes to upgrade the hominid processing power. This fusion is the literal fingerprint of the gods. But if they gave us intelligence, they withheld something else: longevity. In the Garden of Eden story, Adam and Eve are expelled to prevent them from eating from the tree of life and becoming immortal like us. The Sumerian king list records reigns of kings lasting tens of thousands of years before the flood. But after the flood, lifespans plummet dramatically. Was this a genetic downgrade? Did the Anunnaki deliberately shorten our telomeres to introduce a kill switch, ensuring the worker population would never live long enough to challenge their masters? This terrifying thought suggests that death as we know it is not a natural inevitability, but a manufactured obsolescence. This genetic framework perfectly contextualizes the story of Enoch. When the Bible says he was perfect in his generations, it could mean he carried the purest strain of the original Anunnaki DNA, making him the ideal candidate for contact. His abduction may have been a genetic checkup, and his transformation into the archangel Metatron, whose flesh turned to flame, a metaphor for a transhumanist upgrade, his consciousness uploaded or his biology enhanced to withstand the rigors of off-world environments. This narrative of a global civilizing mission, led by the scientific Enki faction, did not end in the Middle East. It spread across the planet. Our next investigation will cross the Atlantic to explore the shocking connections between the Egyptian god of wisdom, Thoth, the Mesoamerican feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, and the Sumerian lord of the secret arts, Ningishzida, who Sitchin argues are all the same being. They are all serpent gods who brought knowledge, the calendar and civilization after a great catastrophe. Subscribe to Astroway so you don't miss our journey to uncover the identity of this single globe-trotting entity. As we move closer to the modern era, the physical evidence of this ancient grid becomes harder to ignore. We find a trail of out-of-place artifacts or OO parts that defy their historical timeline. There is the Antikythera mechanism, a complex analog computer from ancient Greece used to predict eclipses with stunning accuracy. There is the Baghdad battery, a simple clay pot with a copper cylinder and an iron rod that could produce an electrical charge, suggesting a knowledge of electrochemistry 2,000 years before Galvani. And in Egypt, the Dendera temple complex contains a relief that bears an uncanny resemblance to a giant light bulb, complete with a large glass tube, a filament in the shape of a serpent, and a cable connecting it to a power source. Mainstream archaeology explains these as religious symbols or coincidences, but are they? Or are they the fading schematics of a forgotten technology? This lost technology may also explain the impossible megaliths scattered across the globe. The stone of the pregnant woman at Baalbek remains in its quarry, a single cut block of limestone weighing over 200 tons. No modern crane could lift it today. At Sacsayhuaman in Peru, massive polygonal stones weighing up to 200 tons are fitted together with such precision that not even a blade of grass can pass between them, creating a structure that is virtually earthquake-proof. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, diorite and andesite blocks, stones so hard they are nearly impossible to shape with primitive tools, are cut with machine-like precision, featuring perfect right angles and drilled holes. This global style of Cyclopean masonry, from Malta to Easter Island, suggests a unified school of engineering, perhaps the very school of the Watchers who taught Enoch the secrets of masonry and geometry. This brings us back to the 366 books of Enoch. If he returned to Earth with volumes containing the secrets of the stars and the proper courses of the luminaries, then the sudden astronomical genius of the Babylonians and Mayans is not a mystery. It is a legacy. The Mayan calendar, which tracks the 25,572-year cycle of the precession of the equinoxes, requires observational data spanning millennia, a time frame that a fledgling civilization simply did not have, unless they were given the cheat codes. Is it possible that the Anunnaki didn't just give us the calendar, but also marked it with a date for their return? This is the question that haunts the final pages of our script. According to Sitchin, the Anunnaki did not leave because they wanted to. They left because the political climate on Earth, and perhaps on Nibiru, shifted. Around 550 BC, the last of the great Anunnaki leaders, Marduk, solidified his rule in Babylon, and the others departed, promising to return when the time of the cycle was complete. This concept of a day of the Lord, a day of judgment and return, is the foundation of messianic prophecy in every major religion. But stripped of religious language, is it simply the scheduled arrival of the mining fleet's command ship? As we scan the skies with our modern telescopes, looking for exoplanets and signals with the SETI program, are we looking for strangers, or are we looking for our parents coming home? However, intellectual honesty demands that we pause and look at these claims through the lens of critical scrutiny. The academic community vehemently rejects the ancient astronaut hypothesis, and their arguments are not without merit. Linguists point out that Zecharia Sitchin was not a professionally trained Sumerologist, and many of his translations, such as interpreting the word Shem as rocket rather than name or monument, are contested by standard dictionaries. Psychologists argue that we are victims of pareidolia, the tendency to see familiar patterns in random data. We see spaceships in ancient carvings because we live in the space age, just as medieval monks saw demons because they lived in an age of faith. Critics suggest that by attributing our ancestors' greatest achievements to aliens, we are robbing humanity of its own ingenuity and resilience. They argue that the giants of the Bible were merely men of great renown, not biological monstrosities, and that the sons of God were the righteous lineage of Seth mixing with the corrupt lineage of Cain, a theological lesson rather than a genetic report. Yet even as the skeptics deconstruct the translations, modern science is beginning to reconstruct the context. For decades, the idea of a rogue planet in our solar system, Nibiru, was ridiculed. But in recent years, Caltech astronomers have found mathematical evidence for a Planet 9, a massive object lurking far beyond Pluto, with an elliptical orbit of roughly 10,000 to 20,000 years. While not exactly the 3,600-year Shah of Sitchin, the confirmation that our solar system likely harbors another massive body aligns uncomfortably well with the Sumerian claim of a 12th celestial member. Furthermore, the recent disclosure of UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, by the Pentagon has shifted the conversation from if to what. If the US Navy is encountering tic-tac objects that defy the laws of aerodynamics and inertia, are we seeing advanced foreign tech, or are we seeing the Watchers checking in on their investment? The pilots describe these craft as having no visible propulsion, much like the glory of the Lord that moved without wings or wheels in Ezekiel's vision. This brings us to a convergence of ancient prophecy and modern reality. If the Anunnaki are real, and if they operate on a cyclical timeline, then the signs in the heavens spoken of by Enoch take on a new, urgent meaning. We are currently seeing a resurgence of interest in DNA editing, with CRISPR technology allowing us to play God and edit the genome, essentially recreating the very sin of the Watchers. We are building our own Tower of Babel with the Internet, a hive mind that connects all humanity in a single language of binary code. And we are on the verge of becoming a multi-planetary species ourselves, with missions planned for Mars. Are we unconsciously following a blueprint encoded in our junk DNA? Are we preparing the infrastructure for their return, or are we preparing to challenge them? The loops of history are closing. We mentioned earlier a division of opinion regarding the Watchers, whether they are spiritual or biological. But there is a third option, that they are interdimensional. Some modern physicists propose that the heavens Enoch visited were not other planets, but other dimensions, accessible through the portals he described. This aligns with Jacques Vallée's control system hypothesis, suggesting that these entities have been manipulating human development not just through genetics, but through consciousness itself. Whether they come from Nibiru, the Pleiades, or a parallel brain of reality, the result is the same. We are not alone, and we never have been. As we reach the end of this investigation, we must confront the final, lingering mystery of the sleeping gods. There are persistent rumors, often discussed in the fringes of the intelligence community and by whistleblowers, of stasis chambers discovered in Iraq, ancient Sumer, and the mountains of Iran. These alleged sarcophagi, supposedly containing beings in a state of suspended animation, are said to be protected by intense energy fields. Is it possible that the Watchers didn't all leave, that a garrison remained behind, sleeping through the millennia, waiting for a specific signal, perhaps a specific configuration of the stars or a level of technological maturity in humanity, to wake up? If Enoch is indeed the scribe of this celestial court, his return or the return of the entities he served may not be the spiritual rapture many expect, but a formal inspection of the colony. Ultimately, the story of Enoch leaves us with a profound duality. He is either the ultimate fictional archetype of the sage, created by ancient minds to bridge the terrifying gap between man and the divine, or he was the first human ambassador to an extraterrestrial civilization, chosen to document the end of one world and the beginning of another. If the Anunnaki really existed, and Enoch was their scribe, it means our religious history is actually a record of colonial governance by a superior species. But consider this final twist. As we develop artificial general intelligence, as we learn to extend our lifespans, and as we look to terraform Mars, we are becoming the gods. We are becoming the Anunnaki. We are the ones who will soon descend on other worlds, perhaps to create life, perhaps to mine resources. And so the final question is not just did they create us, but are we destined to become them? Would accepting this cyclical nature of the universe change your fundamental view of your purpose? Are we children waiting for our parents, or are we the new gods in training? We invite you to reflect on this journey and share your deepest thoughts in the comments. If this investigation has expanded your horizon, please subscribe and join us for the next chapter of our search for truth. As we gaze up at the same stars that once rushed and hastened Enoch into the sky, we remain like him, small figures standing on the edge of a vast, mysterious cosmos, waiting for the Watchers to return. To truly understand the machinery of the Anunnaki Empire, we must look beyond the confines of Earth. If the Sumerian texts are to be believed, Earth was not an isolated outpost, but the final link in a logistical chain that stretched across the solar system. Zecharia Sitchin's translation of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, interprets the celestial battle not just as the formation of the solar system, but as a map of colonization. And in this map, the planet Mars, known to the Sumerians as Lahmu, plays a critical, terrifying role. It was the way station. The gravitational gravity well of Earth is deep and costly to escape. Hauling heavy loads of refined gold directly from the Persian Gulf to a mothership in deep orbit would be energetically inefficient. But Mars has lower gravity, a thinner atmosphere, and, according to recent rover data, once possessed vast oceans and a thicker, breathable air. It was the perfect transshipment point. This changes the narrative of the Igigi, the 300 astronauts who stayed in heaven while the 600 Anunnaki descended to Earth. The Igigi were likely the Mars garrison, the weary dock workers of the solar system, operating a base on the red planet that coordinated the shuttle flights. This hypothesis forces us to re-examine the controversial images beamed back by the Viking 1 orbiter in 1976, specifically the Cydonia region. While NASA officially dismissed the face on Mars as a trick of light and shadow, a case of pareidolia, independent image analysts have pointed to the surrounding structures, a five-sided D&M pyramid and a complex layout that mirrors the geometry of Giza and Teotihuacan. If we entertain the possibility, however briefly, that Lahmu was inhabited by the Igigi, then the face is not a trick of light, but a monument to a fallen commander, perhaps Alalu, the first Anunnaki king to discover Earth, who was exiled to Mars to die. The desolation we see on Mars today, the iron oxide rust that stains the planet red, might not be just geology. Dr. John Brandenburg, a plasma physicist, has published papers suggesting that the isotopic signature of xenon-129 found in the Martian atmosphere is consistent with the fallout of a massive thermonuclear explosion. Did the War of the Gods spill over into space? Was the Mars base obliterated in a conflict between the Enlilite and Enkiite factions, leaving the planet a radioactive wasteland and trapping the remaining Anunnaki on Earth? This isolation on Earth would explain the sudden desperate urgency of the Watchers to breed with humanity. Cut off from their home, trapped on a gravity-heavy planet, they were a dying garrison. This context adds a layer of tragic desperation to the sin of the Watchers. In the Book of Enoch, the angels don't just lust after women, they trade secrets for access. The text explicitly lists the forbidden technologies they traded. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, the technology of warfare. Semjaza taught root cuttings and sorcery, the technology of chemistry and pharmaceuticals. Barakijal taught astrology, the technology of navigation. This was an unauthorized technology transfer program. They were weaponizing humanity, perhaps building their own private armies to secure their power base on Earth, since they could no longer return to the stars. The Book of Giants, a fragmented text found at Qumran, gives us a glimpse into the chaotic rule of their offspring. It mentions the giant Gilgamesh and a figure named Hobabish, likely Humbaba, the monster of the cedar forest. These beings were not just tall, they were described as anomalies who suffered from terrible nightmares. In one dream, a giant sees a tablet where names are being washed away by water, a premonition of the flood. This suggests the Nephilim were aware of their impending obsolescence. They were biological errors, perhaps sterile or genetically unstable, prone to madness and violence. The corruption of the earth described in Genesis was the industrial-scale devastation caused by these demigods using high-tech weaponry to carve out kingdoms. When we find vitrified forts in Scotland, or the Great Glass Sea in the Egyptian desert, where the sand has been fused into yellow glass at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, are we looking at the blast zones of these Nephilim wars? Consider the Vajra of Indra in Hindu texts, or the thunderbolt of Zeus. In the hands of a primitive statue, these look like jagged lightning bolts. But look closely at the representations in Tibetan art. The Vajra is a machined metallic object with prongs that can open and close. It is described as a weapon that can cut through any material and kill without leaving a mark. Is this a plasma discharge weapon? And what of the Ark of the Covenant, built to the specific blueprints given to Moses? It required shittim wood, an insulator, and gold, a conductor. It could kill a man instantly if touched, cause tumors, radiation sickness in the Philistines who stole it, and allowed the user to speak to the Lord between the cherubim wings. To an electrical engineer, the Ark is not a magic box. It is a high-voltage capacitor and a radio transceiver. If Enoch saw the warehouse where these devices were stored, if he saw the armory of the Watchers, his warning to Methuselah becomes a frantic plea: hide the knowledge, for the fire is coming. The narrative loop we opened regarding the seven sages, or Apkallu, connects here. In Sumerian myth, these fish-garbed beings emerged from the Persian Gulf to teach wisdom. Sitchin identified them as the Enkiite scientists. But notice the timing. They appear after the initial colonization, perhaps as a countermeasure to the chaotic teachings of the Watchers. While the Watchers taught war, the Apkallu taught civilization, law, and mathematics, an attempt to civilize the workforce before they destroyed themselves. This duality of good tech versus bad tech permeates our history. We are still fighting this war. We have split the atom, a knowledge that can power a city or erase it. We have cracked the genome, a knowledge that can cure cancer or create monsters. We are walking in the footprints of the Nephilim, holding the same dangerous tools that once forced the gods to hit the reset button. The question is, have we matured enough to handle the fire this time? As we enter the final chapter of this investigation, we must peel back the last layer of the Anunnaki mystery. We have established they came for gold to repair their atmosphere, but many researchers believe this environmental excuse was merely a cover story for the lower caste workers. The elite, the royals like Anu, Enlil, and Enki, had a darker, more personal addiction to the precious metal. In ancient alchemy, there is a legend of the philosopher's stone, a substance that grants immortality. But the oldest alchemical texts don't describe a stone. They describe a powder, white powder gold, or what modern physics calls monatomic gold, ORME, orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements. When gold atoms are separated and spun at high speeds, they enter a high-spin state where they lose their metallic properties and become a white superconducting powder that defies gravity. Ancient Egyptian texts speak of the mifkizit, the bread of the presence eaten by the pharaohs to journey to the field of the blessed. Was the manna provided to the Israelites in the desert, described as a fine, flake-like substance that tasted of honey, actually a high-tech nutritional supplement derived from gold? If the Anunnaki consumed this substance to repair their telomeres and superconduct the electrical impulses of their nervous systems, their immortality was not magic. It was biology, augmented by chemistry. They were not gods. They were transhumanists. They had solved the problem of aging. This cast the story of Adam and Eve in a new light. The tree of life wasn't a tree. It was a supply of this monatomic gold. Being cast out of the garden was simply being cut off from the supply line. We were engineered to be temporary workers, designed to die. But Enoch was allowed to eat. The sweet ointment that transformed him, the food of the angels he consumed, changed his physiology. He became one of them. This brings us to the ultimate destiny of Enoch, who in Jewish mysticism ascends to become Metatron, the voice of God. The descriptions of Metatron are terrifyingly non-biological. He has 72 wings, 365,000 eyes, and his body is fire. In the age of artificial intelligence, these descriptions sound less like a spirit and more like a cyborg, a consciousness uploaded into a synthetic, omniscient mainframe. Did Enoch become the ship's computer? Did he merge with the AI that runs the Anunnaki fleet? If the Anunnaki are an advanced civilization, they likely passed the singularity eons ago. Perhaps the God that Enoch walked with was not a biological entity, but the collective digital consciousness of the Nibiruans. This would explain why he was not, for God took him. He ceased to be biological. He was uploaded. And now, look at us. Look at you watching this on a screen that connects you to the hive mind of the internet. We are building Neuralink to merge our brains with AI. We are sending probes to Mars. We are rewriting our DNA with CRISPR. We are mining the Earth for rare earth metals to power our cloud. We are following the Anunnaki blueprint step by step. We are not just waiting for the gods to return. We are becoming the gods we worshipped. The cycle is closing. The year 2040 and 2060 have been flagged by Isaac Newton, who studied these very texts, as pivotal dates for the end of the age. Is this when the orbit of Nibiru brings it back to the inner solar system? Or is this the date when humanity finally achieves the technological parity required to join the galactic community? The return of the Anunnaki may not be an invasion fleet darkening the skies. It might be a silent handshake, a recognition that the Lulu has finally graduated. Or it could be a harvest. If the gardener returns and finds the garden overgrown with weeds, violent, nuclear-armed, environmentally destructive weeds, he may decide, as Enlil did 12,000 years ago, to turn on the water. This is the dual legacy of Enoch. He is the warning that we are being watched. He is the proof that we can transcend. As you sit here, the product of 200,000 years of genetic tinkering, possessing the aggression of a chimp and the dreams of a star god, you must ask yourself, which side of your nature will win? Are we the children of the fallen watchers, destined to burn our world in a nuclear fire? Or are we the heirs of Enoch, ready to put on the garments of glory and walk among the stars? The tablets are broken, but the code is still running in your blood. The Anunnaki never really left. They are here, in the ambition that drives you, in the eyes you see in the mirror. The experiment is ongoing, and the results are due soon. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the forbidden history of humanity. If this series has sparked a fire in your mind, share it with others. The truth is not a destination, it is a trajectory, and at Astroway we are just beginning to chart the course. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, the sky is not the limit, it is the origin.